The British Empire, which came to encompass a quarter of the land and the world's population, had its roots in medieval England under Alfred the Great in the year 878 AD. Alfred defended his Anglo-Saxon kingdom against the Danish Viking invaders, achieving victory at the Battle of Edington and signing the Treaty of Wedmore, which established the Danelaw. His grandson, Athelstan, completed the unification of England in 924. If it's your first time on the channel, subscribe now so you don't miss any important content about the darkest chapters of our history. The British expansion was consolidated under Henry II, who in 1171 established English control over Ireland. Later, Edward I consolidated control over Wales between 1277 and 1282, facing fierce resistance. Although the Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, and the Wars of the Roses, 1455 to 1487, weakened England, they did not stop its imperial ambitions. The discovery of America by Christopher Columbus in 1492 spurred the British to explore the New World. Giovanni Caboto, known as John Cabot, claimed lands in North America for England in 1497. Although his second voyage in 1498 was unsuccessful, his explorations paved the way for future colonization. In 1606, the Virginia Company of London was founded, and in 1607, settlers established Jamestown, facing extreme hardships but thriving with the cultivation of tobacco. The East India Company established a trading post in Surat, India, in 1612, marking the beginning of British-Indian trade relations. Religious persecution in England led the Puritans to establish the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630 under John Winthrop, while Lord Baltimore founded Maryland in 1634 seeking religious freedom and economic opportunities. The conflict with Scotland, centered around the imposition of Anglicanism, culminated in the Peace of 1639 when the Scottish Covenanting Army resisted the troops of Charles I. The East India Company expanded its influence in India with the foundation of Fort St. George on the coastal region in 1639. This settlement, initially simple, grew in complexity due to the tensions and ambitions of the company. In Ireland, pressure from British and Scottish settlers on Irish Catholics triggered a rebellion in 1641, intensified by acts of violence. The Irish Confederation sought an autonomous solution loyal to King Charles I, but the English Civil War, culminating in the execution of Charles I and the ascension of Oliver Cromwell, altered the situation. Cromwell, a fervent Puritan, carried out a brutal campaign in Ireland and Scotland, subduing Catholics and destroying social structures. His Commonwealth government also sought to expand British dominance in America and Africa, with the invasion of Jamaica and the capture of New York as notable achievements. His reign ended with the restoration of the monarchy under Charles II, who promoted colonial expansion and trade with Africa. During the period of conflict with the Dutch, the British Empire lost several colonies in America and Africa. The Glorious Revolution in England brought significant changes to the American colonies, with Protestant rebels replacing Catholic governments. As the war spread, notable confrontations occurred, such as the Battle of Port Royal and the Battle of Quebec. The 9 Years' War in Europe also affected the East India Company and its ambitions in India. Although the Treaty of Ryswick sought to maintain peace between England and France, tensions persisted. In 1707, a new conflict arose over the American colonies. In the context of a succession crisis in Spain, King Charles II of Spain, without heirs, left two claimants to the throne: Archduke Charles of Austria and Philip of Anjou, the Bourbon prince and possible successor to King Louis XIV of France. The English feared a union of the French and Spanish crowns, which would strengthen Catholicism, so they declared war. The war began in Europe due to the Spanish succession but quickly moved to the American colonies, restructuring European colonization. The first battle in America took place at Fort Albemarle, where the French, led by Clotte de Ramsay, defeated the English. The battle for Acadia, led by the English Francis Nicholson and Samuel Chichely, culminated in the fall of Port Royal on October 5, 1710, with the surrender of French Governor Daniel d'Aguilar. The territory passed into English control and was renamed Annapolis Royal. The Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 legitimized Philip V as King of Spain, and the Asiento de Negros, slave trade agreement, was part of the treaty, opening new opportunities for the British Empire and establishing its global dominance. However, on July 4, 1776, the 13 American colonies declared their independence with the famous Declaration of Independence, marking the beginning of the American Revolution. The conflict intensified with victories and defeats for both sides. General George Washington of the United States, facing great difficulties, achieved a crucial victory at Trenton on December 26, 1776, and at Saratoga, where the Americans forced the surrender of British General Burgoyne on October 17, 1777. This victory convinced France to support the rebels, leading to a Franco-American alliance that resulted in the siege of Georgetown and the surrender of Cornwallis on October 19, 1781. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 formalized the independence of the United States, while the British Empire focused on India. In India, British expansion continued with the fall of Mysore in 1799 after the death of Tipu Sultan. The consolidation of British control was carried out through the East India Company Act of 1784, which established a secret council to govern the colonies. British control expanded with victory at the Battle of Deoghar in 1803 against the Marathas. In Europe, the Napoleonic threat was resolved with British victories at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 and at Waterloo in 1815, securing British supremacy. The Napoleonic Wars led to the Continental Blockade and the 1807 abolition of the Slave Trade Act, which prohibited the slave trade, although slavery was still permitted. The War of 1812 between the United States and Great Britain resulted in a series of confrontations, including the British invasion of Washington, D.C., and the burning of government buildings. However, the conflict ended with no significant territorial changes, with the Treaty of Ghent. In the first half of the 19th century, Great Britain continued to expand its influence in Australia and New South Wales through colonization and exploration, advancing under the leadership of figures such as Captain Arthur Phillip and Major Thomas Mitchell. In 1942, the Allied victory at El Alamein and the entry of the United States into the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor boosted British morale. The D-Day landings and the defeat of Germany in May 1945 marked the end of the war in Europe. However, the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki led to Japan's surrender in August 1945. The war marked the beginning of the end of the British Empire. In the post-war period, India gained independence in 1947, and other colonial nations also achieved independence, such as Ghana in 1957 and Malaysia in 1957. The process of decolonization continued in Africa and the Caribbean, culminating in the independence of Zimbabwe in 1980 and the return of Hong Kong to China in 1997, symbolizing the end of the British Empire. If you've made it this far and learned something new from our stories, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. Together, we can discover and remember the truths that history often tries to hide.